So, Riggs, tell me about tell me the date when you got in a shooting.
The date of the shooting was February 5th. I'm sorry, February 21st, 2005.
And tell me what happened that night.
Basically, it was a situation where my partner at the time and I was returning a curfew to a home in the Douglas Lawn neighborhood. When we exited the home, going back to our squad car, we heard what we thought was a gunshot, or what sounded like a gunshot, south of our location. This was around almost 1 o'clock in the morning. We got into our squad car, and minutes later, from hearing the sound of the gunshot, we observed a van coming up the wrong way on a one-way street that goes southbound, the street that we were on, with its lights out, basically coming from the direction of where we thought this gunshot could have occurred. We got behind the vehicle. It traveled eastbound and then later southbound on Lawndale Avenue. We curbed the vehicle and it stopped in roughly 1900 block of South Lawndale. We exited our vehicle. The offender, in this case, exited his vehicle immediately from the driver's side, driver's seat. He became very abrasive, defensive, agitated.
Let me interrupt though, but didn't another squad car join you at the time?
Yeah, another squad car. We had no idea the squad car observed us, but a squad car in the area observed us following this vehicle, and then eventually observed us turn on our overhead lights in our squad car. They assumed we were going to enact a traffic stop on this vehicle, and they pulled in behind us. My partner and I did not know this until later on in the incident that this had occurred.
Go on.
So basically, as we exited the vehicle, he exited the vehicle, became very agitated. He wanted to know why we stopped him. I basically tried to explain to him why we stopped him. I tried to calm him down. I told him to relax. He did not do so. As I went to the passenger side of the vehicle, my partner confronted him on the driver's side of the vehicle, his vehicle. And the agitation continued, the talking amongst myself and him continued.
Can you give me an example of what kind of things he was saying?
First thing he said was, "What the fuck you stopping me for?" In a very aggressive, agitated voice. And I explained to him why we stopped him. And then he repeated it, and then he asked him why we were harassing him. And then eventually he stated that, "Fuck that, I'm a police officer," or something along those terms.
And then what happened?
My final words to him was, "Relax, everything's okay." My partner asked him to put his hands on the driver's side of his vehicle. He did so, and then when my partner attempted to pat him down for any type of weapon, he immediately turned around in an aggressive, fighting manner and began to fight my partner.
Then what happened?
I went back around from the passenger side of his vehicle to the driver's side of the vehicle to assist my partner in what was basically a fight with the offender. At that time, that's when I first observed the two assisting officers who had stopped behind our vehicle. And they made it to my partner's aid before I did, basically. So I was in a position to just watch at that point in time and see how this was unfolding. He was fighting with my partner, and then he began to fight with the other two officers also. They attempted to get his hands. They attempted to take him to the ground. He was struggling the entire time. Eventually, they were able to get him down to a knee or close to a knee position, and that's when I saw his right hand in the front of his waistband, basically positioned there. And I also saw the officers trying to pull his right hand, trying to get behind his back. I stated something along the fact, he's got his hand in his waistband, watch out for a weapon, or something along those lines. I then saw him trying to go to the ground, or basically the officers almost getting him to the ground, but like I said, in a struggle, it's hard to keep someone on the ground. So he may have been on the ground for a second and came back up. I don't know. It happened so fast. It could have been a couple times when this happened. I got to the rear of what I would call the melee, trying to position myself where I could grab his feet and just basically pull his feet out from underneath him so he could just go prone on the ground easily for the officers. But before I could do that, as I was positioning myself around the fight, I heard another officer yell, "Gun, gun, gun." I heard the gunshot, saw the muzzle flash coming from in front of his body, immediately saw a handgun in his right hand as he started to rise, and the officers were disengaging him at that point in time, and he became standing and basically circled around to a position where he was firing at the officers to my left and eventually firing at me.
What was the distance between him and you guys when he started firing?
It was a very close distance. I started backing up. All the other officers started backing up. He actually, once he became standing, started backing up. So the distance was becoming greater as the situation unfolded. But it was, I mean, it was from a point where we were all, well, those three officers were touching him, and I was pretty much on top of them, to a distance of, I think when I started firing, it couldn't have been more than, I would say 10 feet away from him.
And so what happened? He's firing at you, and then what happened?
He fired at an officer to the right, who I found out later was Officer White. To my left, I mean. And then he was basically circled around to where he acquired me as his target. And he pointed his gun, basically ended up pointing at me, and several gun flashes, muzzle flashes. And I could see his gun cycling as he was pointing the gun right at me. So I knew he was firing at me several times, and I was firing at him.
And is this when you were shot?
Yes. As I was firing back at him, as he was firing at me, I felt a gunshot wound hit my left lower forearm, and then a round hit my left upper chest area.
And when you felt this, did you keep firing?
Yes, I kept firing. During this process, I knew I'd been hit, but at this time that I was being hit, I was firing my weapon. He eventually went down to the ground, and that gave me a break in the gunfight, so to speak, to where I stopped firing. I dropped my magazine out of my weapon, not knowing how many rounds I had fired, and I basically reloaded with a full magazine, not knowing if the gunfight was going to continue or not.
At this point, did you feel terror, or were you just reacting?
At this point, I was just reacting to what was going on. So there was no feeling other than what was my reaction to his actions, basically.
And then what happened?
At that point in time, I saw an opportunity also to get behind something instead of being out in the open. So I went around to our squad car that was parked in Middle Street and acquired a position on the passenger side of the squad car, and then began to look for him where I thought he had fell down to the ground. When I saw him again, he was basically kind of in a upright seated position, pointing his weapon at I didn't know who. I would assume was the other officers at the time, and then his weapon basically was fanning back and forth at one point in time, pointing towards me, and that's when I started firing at him again from the passenger side of our squad car.
And then what happened?
I fired several rounds again at him. At that point in time, a few seconds later, he basically laid backwards and his right arm went backwards, and it appeared as though either he was done or incapacitated. So he was laying on the ground on his back. I saw other officers start approaching him. At that point in time, I seated myself next to the tire, the front passenger tire of the squad car, and started doing damage assessment on my body.
And then what happened?
I noticed a gaping hole in my left forearm, lots of blood, and then I started attempting to feel my left chest area to see if a bullet penetrated that. I couldn't feel anything. I didn't see any blood on my hand when I was probing my chest. I felt pain in my chest, but I was also aware enough to know that that doesn't mean I wasn't hit in the chest. So I remember getting on the radio at one point in time and letting them know that an officer had been hit. At that point in time, other officers started arriving. The first officer that I saw, I told him I had been shot and I needed to get to the hospital as soon as possible. And I got into the backseat of the squad car and they drove me to the hospital.
What was it like on the ride to the hospital? What was going through your head? What did you do?
Well, on the scene, and then at first, when not knowing how badly I'd been hurt, I started thinking about, this could be the end. And then thoughts along those lines. And then the officers start showing up, and then I kick back into survival mode and saying, okay, now it's time to get to the hospital. They load me at the hospital. And then on the way to the hospital, I started thinking I need to contact my family to let them know where to go, just in case I fainted or passed out and was not able to call them myself. I didn't want anyone else to call them because that would be a horrible phone call to get. So I wanted to call them myself. Number one, to let them know that I was talking and tell them to get there to the hospital. So I started calling the people I knew at the time in my family to go to the hospital because I had been shot.
At this point, did the terror set in?
Not at that point. It was just unknown. I just had a feeling of unknown of what was going to happen. I tried to took care of the phone calls on the way to the hospital, and that's all I remember is really the phone calls. And then I think by the time I was done with the phone calls, we were either at the hospital or almost the hospital. We stopped, and I got out of the car. I was able to walk on my own. And they assisted me to the emergency room, but I was able to basically to walk into the hospital myself.
Oh, shit. So the offender, Howard Morgan, was charged. What was he charged with in connection with this?
4 counts of attempted murder of a police officer, 4 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm of a police officer, and a couple other crimes below that.
And what happened in the first trial? What were some of the defense claims in this case? Repeat that.
Some of the defense claims in this case.
In the first trial.
In the first trial, and it carried through the second trial. Basically, the evidence, in my opinion, and in most people's opinion, was so much against him. In other words, the evidence that the Chicago police had collected, the evidence at the scene, the photographs, everything pointed to the fact that he did fire his weapon, his own weapon that he carried that night, and I was struck by a bullet that came from his weapon. So the evidence that was found on the scene in this case was just overwhelming. So it appeared their defense was this is a situation where this is 4 white police officers. The offender was a black male, and this is a case where the Chicago Police Department is trying to cover up the wrongdoing of these 4 white police officers. So their defense wasn't necessarily stated, but implied that this is racial, first of all. And second of all, that this was just a big cover-up by the Chicago police officer to hide any wrongdoing on our part, basically.
Well, how did you feel about that?
I felt it was unfair. I felt that, especially the race side of it, was completely unjustified and basically racist itself. You know, these were the people who were saying this were black men and women. The people who were bringing up the issue that we were 4 white police officers were black men and women. There was no race was not a part of this case at all. And as a matter of fact, it was never brought up in trial because there was no evidence of race being a element of anything that happened in this case. However, in the press and outside the courtroom and in an attempt to sway public opinion, it was brought up constantly by the black women and black men involved in this case for no other reason other than we were white. And that is racist, period.
Well, you talked about the press. Can you describe what the bias you found in the press in this case? Some examples and maybe some of the reporters?
Yeah, there's an obvious, there's a complexity involved in these cases because the Chicago Police Department doesn't talk about these cases, especially when they're ongoing inside the criminal court system. And I am not allowed to talk about these cases at that point in time. However, the offender and the offender's family and the offender's supporters, they are allowed to talk about this, and they did talk about this. And the press obviously listened and printed everything that they said against us. I found that most of the people who were involved in this case didn't even show up for most of the trial. They only showed up for the certain points that were dramatic, i.e. the verdict or the closing statements. Most of them, if not all of them, did not know the fine details or even the basic evidence of this trial. They just wanted to print what was sensational or racial or anything to do with the police cover-up or the allegation of police cover-up. It just seems like the press sinks their teeth into because in some ways probably wants to believe that because that would be a good story.
Was there any reporter in particular whose conduct you thought was egregious?
Yeah, there was in the first trial. I forget his name. What was it?
Was it
Thomas?
Thomas. Charles Thomas.
Charles Thomas. Charles Thomas basically immediately started reporting at the request of their attorney. Before the trial even started, he reported and basically in his stories implied that this could be, if not, a police cover-up of 4 white police officers shooting a black male. That by itself, I think, is unethical. Just to put that out there, because all that does is taint the jury in a certain direction.
Well, can you, with all your years of experience as a cop, can you imagine the police ever doing that? Have you ever heard or seen anything close to where the police 4 cops would decide one night to execute a man because of his race or for any reason? Have you ever heard of such a thing?
I've never come across it. In the 20 years that I've been a police officer, I've never heard of anything or even known anyone who would be capable of that. Even if it was a situation where it was an error on our part, and for this shooting to become what they claiming or implied that it became, it would have been an error of all 4 police officers. And not only that, but the story would have to be set by all 4 police officers in a matter of hours after the scene, while I'm being treated in the hospital.
Yes, I found it unbelievable that, the second group of officers who came, they were not from your unit, were they?
No, I didn't know who they were.
So for this to have been some kind of conspiracy or some misconduct, then you guys would have had to get in this gunfight and then concoct a story while you're wounded right after the shooting. Isn't that correct?
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely correct. a story would have to be agreed upon, I guess, by everyone involved, and not only the four officers, but the detectives investigating it, the evidence technicians involved in the crime scene processing, the supervisors on the scene. Every shooting, high-ranking Chicago Police Department supervisors show up. The superintendent showed up here. All of these people would have to agree, this is the story that we're going to make about this shooting. This is the story that we're going to put out there. And not only that, but everyone involved would have to have the lack of conscience to go along with this story from the very beginning of the scene to the very end of both trials.
And also,
That seems to be an impossibility to me.
and also, while you were sitting in the next to the car wounded, you would also have had to have had the presence to concoct a story in those moments, wouldn't you? Because you all went to separate hospitals, didn't you?
Yes, it would be the simple fact is it would have been impossible for everyone to get on the same page with a made-up, ridiculous story, as the defense implied that was enacted or comprised of that night. It would have been impossible.
So how did you feel about this story that Charles Thomas was running with? I mean, and the media, what were your feelings towards the media for putting out these stories you felt were so absurd?
I thought my first thought was typical. My second thought was, unbelievable and unethical. Yeah, absolutely. But this is how defenses ran, especially here in Chicago, where the image of a police officer, the image of race relations is horrible. And also in a society, and I'm talking about a local society of Chicago, where people want to believe it. People want to believe that there's police corruption, especially against minorities in this city.
And I suppose the irony of that is that you were actually trying to stop a shooting when this all occurred.
Well, at least investigate what may have happened.
Yeah.
But the way the offender reacted immediately inhibited us to run any type of investigation of whether or not he was involved in any misconduct or anybody else. He dictated the scene from the very beginning.
So what was the verdict in that first trial?
The first trial was a hung jury.
And why do you think it was a hung jury, in your opinion?
I think there were some jurors who would not allow themselves to convict this man, and part of it I think had to do with the culture that we live in these days, where people want to believe in police corruption. People want to believe that white police officers are racist, and white police officers have no problem shooting black males, regardless who they are in this society. I think, unfortunately, that is a sentiment that a lot of people in this society believe in.
So, well, how did it feel to get a hung jury? I mean, after going through a shooting, and let's clarify, in the shooting, you took one round in the area of the chest, correct?
That's correct.
And you were saved by your bulletproof vest?
Yes, the round hit the vest. I had severe bruising on the left chest area. And then the round was recovered in the hospital from my jacket, the same round that hit my vest.
So there's a very good chance that without your vest, that would have been a fatal wound.
Could have been, yes.
Okay, so how did you feel about this hung jury after all you went through?
I tried to keep everything in perspective. It was disappointing and frustrating, but I also knew that the state's attorneys involved in this case put a lot of effort into it and believed us 100% and had no doubt in us whatsoever. And I knew that they would want to retry him based on what happened in the first trial. So I just prepared myself to do it all again, basically.
And what was the time period between the first trial and the second trial?
I think it was 3 or 4 years, I think. I don't remember now.
So, in the period between the first and the second trial, what happened with the offenders' supporters? What kind of things were they saying and accusing you of?
At that point, after the first trial, their defense shifted a little bit to they actually took this to the appellate court. They filed a motion to have everything dropped, saying that during the first trial he was acquitted of 3 charges: aggravated battery to Peel 3 times against the other officers, but not against me. The jury agreed on a not guilty verdict on those 3 charges, but hung jury on the rest of the charges.
What were the other charges?
The 4 counts of attempted murder of a police officer and 1 count of aggravated battery to police officer by firearm, with me as the victim. So those were the hung verdicts. They attempted to have basically the rest of the charges thrown out, claiming that it would be double jeopardy to try the defendant again because he was found not guilty on 3 counts of the 9 counts. Yes.
But that's a kind of a legal fallacy, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, it was support. The motion was denied, and then the appellate court upheld it based on past case law that from the Supreme Court saying that he should be retried, and it is lawful to be retried on the remaining counts. Yes.
And what other things was the community of his supporters doing?
That they were his supporters. Basically, tried to make this about race as much as possible. Every time they talk about this incident, we were mentioned as the 4 white police officers. Every time they talk about this incident, he was mentioned as a black male. Of course, they wanted this. They wanted to emphasize a point that that this was police corruption, police misconduct, and a cover-up by the Chicago Police Department, even though they had nothing to present that this is the case. They had nothing other than the fact that, again, we were 4 white police officers and he was a black male.
But didn't religious organizations get behind him? And stuff?
Yes, a lot of the Southside ministers got together and got their congregation to actually go to a lot of the trial to show support for him. And to spread the word that this was a case of police misconduct against of 4 white police officers against a black male. That was basically the message.
So you went through like a 5-year period of these constant allegations that you were the criminal when you were wounded. What was that like?
It was frustrating, but the job wasn't over with. He was still free. My job wasn't over with. I knew I'd have to testify again. So I try to keep it all in perspective. I try any type of frustration or anger or disappointment I had, I suppressed. And knowing that I still had a job to do and going up there and telling exactly what happened in order to put him in jail because he was still free and he was still conning everyone with his story that he did absolutely nothing wrong and he was being basically, well, first that he was shot for no reason and now we were trying to say that he shot us. So yeah, that's what I did.
In this period, you experienced your own personal tragedy. I mean, your father passed away, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Well, what was it like? You know, why don't you tell me a little bit about your father being a cop and what it was like, to have, he was kind of a confidant for you, a mentor for you in a lot of ways.
Yeah, obviously he was a big supporter during the whole trial, and was interested in everything that was going on and everything that they had claimed, and we talked about it several times. And then he died after the first trial, shortly after the first trial, and was not around for the second trial. So losing him just in life in general, just as a life mentor was hard, and then losing him during that time period was also hard. Yeah.
Was it particularly hard when the second trial began not to have him around?
Yeah, it was hard not to have someone to talk to in the way that I talked to my father. I had other people to talk to and did, and still had family members obviously around. But yeah, it was definitely more difficult with him not being around.
So tell me what happened in the second trial.
Second trial had the same flair. It was the evidence and our testimony was presented almost exactly the same way that was in the first trial. He had a different attorney. He had a disagreement with his first attorney, which ended badly. And
Who was his first attorney?
Sam Adams Jr. and his father and the people in his office.
What did you think of Sam Adams and the way he presented his case, his style? What did you think of him?
He was Sam Adams Jr. in my opinion is very flamboyant, very dramatic, and he speaks to the jurors. He knows which buttons to push, and and a lot of points during the trial. It seemed like they didn't have the facts straight, but they knew which dramatic points to push to sway a jury each way. You know, he's a defense attorney, and he's a good theatrical defense attorney. And unfortunately, in a jury, that probably has more power than just evidence or facts being presented to him.
Did you dislike him?
I didn't dislike him, no. I didn't learn to dislike him or anything else. I honestly thought he was doing a good job for what the case was. They had no evidence to prove their point, so therefore they had to be very careful on what they said. They had no evidence to prove that we did anything wrong, and all the evidence pointed against their client. So I think Sam Adams Jr. did everything he could do and say everything he could say to sway a few jurors to believe that this was a case of corruption. And he did, and he was able to do that. And the fact that there was a hung jury is evidence of the fact that he was able to do that. So in the end, he did what he was paid to do. He did what a defense attorney was supposed to do in that case.
Did you resent his implications that racism played a role in all this?
He himself never really touched that issue.